The silence of space was broken by a single transmission. Commander Jake Morrison sat in the dim command center of Luna Base, his eyes scanning the data feeds from the outer reaches of the solar system. His shift had been uneventful, the usual routine of keeping the station running and ensuring the equipment didn't fail. But tonight was different. A sharp tone cut through the hum of the base, a red light flashing across his console. Jake's fingers stilled over the keys, heart skipping a beat. His eyes narrowed as he examined the data. It wasn't just a glitch. It was a signal from deep space. "What the hell?" he muttered, pulling up the analysis. The signal was faint, fragmented, but unmistakably there. It was coming from the Kepler 442 system, 200 light-years from Earth, beyond even the outermost of human colonies. He adjusted the settings, clearing the static, trying to make sense of the message. The transmission cleaned up slightly, and a voice broke through the interference, strained but clear enough to hear. "This is the colony world Kepler 4. We are sending this message to anyone who might hear us. We are the Zelani people. We have lived in peace on our world for 300 years. We grow crystals that sing in the wind. We build cities that float on our lakes. We have never harmed another living being." Jake leaned forward, his coffee long forgotten as the eerie calm of the voice settled in his mind. There was something about the tone, the unspoken fear beneath the words. Something was wrong. "We have no weapons, we have no armies, we know nothing of war. Our crystals cannot stop their guns, our songs cannot turn away their ships," the voice continued, now trembling. "The destroyers have come to our world, they call themselves the Vikoth Imperium. Their ships are like giant insects made of metal and flesh. They speak of conquest and slavery. They have already taken our outer settlements. Our people are dying." Jake's stomach dropped. He listened, transfixed, as the voice cracked and faltered. "We can see their lights in the sky like angry stars. They are coming to our cities now. The transmission sputtered, and then the voice returned, weaker, desperate. "The destroyers are here. We do not wish to die. Our children hide in the deep caves while their parents sing the old songs. We hope someone will remember us when we are gone. This is our final message. The destroyers are here." The transmission ended with the sound of something that might have been a scream, or it might have been a crystal song. Jake wasn't sure which was worse. His fingers moved quickly across the console, recording everything, sending priority alerts to Earth Command. This was bad, really bad. His mind raced, thinking through the implications of what he'd just heard. The Zelani had never asked for help before. The galaxy had always seen them as peaceful, unassuming, and utterly unprepared for war. He opened a direct line to Admiral Lisa Carter, her image flashing on the main screen. Her sharp blue eyes were set in a familiar, no-nonsense gaze. "Morrison," she said before he could speak, her tone blunt, "tell me you've got more than what's in your initial report." "That's everything, Admiral," Jake said, his voice low. "Signal came from the Kepler 442 system, 200 light-years from here. No follow-up transmissions. The broadcast was ship-based, probably from orbit." Carter's expression hardened. "Any response from the Galactic Council?" Jake checked the feed. "Nothing official yet, but I'm monitoring their channels. Wait, there's something." He paused, pulling up another transmission. "The Council has called an emergency session to discuss the situation." "Discuss," Carter spat, the word heavy with disdain. "While people die, they'll discuss." Jake could see the familiar glint of frustration in her eyes. The same look she'd worn when the corporate wars had broken out in the asteroid belt, when greed and politics had dictated the lives of the workers in the mining colonies. "What are your orders, Admiral?" Jake asked, bracing himself for whatever she would say next. Carter's lips curled into a tight, determined smile. "Get me everything we have on the Vikoth Imperium, every scrap of intelligence, every rumor, every drunken spacer's tale. I want to know what we're dealing with." Jake hesitated for a moment. "Admiral, are we really going to intervene? The system is outside our territory. The Council will say we have no authority." The smile on Carter's face became something sharper, more dangerous. "The Council can kiss my ass. Since when do we need permission to help people who are about to be murdered?" The connection cut abruptly, leaving Jake alone in the control room with the weight of what was coming. He'd seen what humanity was capable of when pushed. The corporate wars had been brutal enough when it was just humans fighting humans. But this was something else. This was a war humanity wasn't supposed to fight, a war that would change everything. He looked out the window, the vastness of space stretching before him. The stars seemed to pulse with a distant, foreboding rhythm. Somewhere out there, the Zelani were hiding in fear. Somewhere out there, the Vikoth Imperium was marching toward their annihilation. Jake sat back in his chair and exhaled slowly. The world had no idea what was coming, but humanity would be ready. The monsters were awake and they would protect the innocent. The galaxy would learn what happened when you threatened people under human protection. The silence that followed the transmission was deafening. Jake stood in front of his console, watching the blinking lights of incoming reports flood his screen. Each new message, a confirmation of the chaos that was unfolding. The Zelani were being slaughtered. It was undeniable, and it was up to humanity to do something about it. Luna Base wasn't equipped for warfare, but the message had been sent, and now every human military outpost, ship, and contractor would rally. Earth's response to the galaxy's call would be swift, but Jake knew better than anyone that the battle ahead was not going to be easy. As he worked sending out orders to Earth Command, he caught a glimpse of the time. Less than 3 hours had passed since the Zelani's final plea, and yet it felt like years. The fleet that would save them was already assembling, an armada of ships, mercenary forces, military vessels, and civilian haulers turned into warships. Humanity was no stranger to conflict, but this was different. This wasn't just another conflict, it was a declaration. The Admiral was moving fast, too fast for the Galactic Council to keep up with. Jake could already feel the tension building within Earth's fleet. As word spread, the volunteers began pouring in. The first call came in from Captain Bate Turner aboard the asteroid Queen, a converted mining hauler. She was already reconfiguring her weapons systems. "We've got the crew ready, Commander," she said over the comms, her voice calm but firm. "We've got the tools, we've got the rage, you just point us in the right direction." "Copy that, Captain," Jake responded, running his fingers through his hair. "I'll make sure the intel gets to you. Prepare for whatever comes. The Vikoth Imperium doesn't know what they're about to face." The next call was from Colonel Maria Santos, a veteran of humanity's most brutal campaigns. She was the leader of the Stormhawks, a mercenary group with a reputation for fearlessness. "We're ready to deploy, Morrison," Santos said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen countless battles. "Just say the word and we'll show these Vikoth how we do things on Earth." "We're not playing fair this time, Colonel," Jake replied. "Whatever it takes." Santos's laughter crackled through the comms. "I was hoping you'd say that." Then came the others, the military leaders, the private contractors, the civilian ships that had been converted into flying fortresses. Everyone was responding. The fleets were assembling. No one was waiting for the Galactic Council's approval. Humanity had already made its decision. Jake sat back in his chair, the weight of the decision settling over him. The Zelani had asked for help and humanity had answered. But this wasn't just about saving one species. It was about sending a message across the stars. There were no more bystanders in this galaxy. The transmission from Admiral Carter came through loud and clear. Her face appeared on the main screen, the stern expression of a leader who was preparing for war. "Morrison, we've gathered every resource we can. The fleet is being mobilized as we speak," she said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. "But we need one thing from you. Every ship under your command, every crew, every civilian volunteer needs to be prepared for one thing." "What's that, Admiral?" Jake asked, knowing her tone well enough to understand the gravity of what was coming. "This is not going to be a war of skirmishes," Carter said, her voice cold as ice. "This is going to be genocide. We are going to make sure that the Vikoth understand that no one threatens the innocent under the protection of humanity." Jake's heart raced. He knew what that meant. The Vikoth wouldn't just be defeated, they would be eliminated. There would be no mercy, no negotiations. Carter had no interest in letting the galaxy's latest oppressors survive. She was sending a clear message to the stars. "We'll be ready, Admiral," Jake said, his voice steady but filled with the weight of his commitment. "Good, I'll see you at the briefing in 3 hours. And Jake, make sure your fleet is ready for hell." The comms cut out, leaving Jake alone again. The words rang in his mind, ready for hell. He stared out at the stars. Humanity had always prided itself on its resilience, on its ability to adapt, to overcome. But this time, it wasn't just about survival. This was something bigger. Humanity was going to teach the galaxy what happens when you push too far. The Zelani were innocent, but the Vikoth Imperium had made the mistake of thinking they could get away with destroying them. And now, humanity was coming for them. Jake stood, walking over to the map of the fleet that was already starting to take shape in front of him. Ships were jumping from orbit, assembling in the darkness of space. A motley collection of battle-hardened veterans, new recruits, and civilians turned warriors. It wasn't the most polished force, but it was the most determined. The Relentless, the flagship of the human fleet, was already en route. Captain Ryan Hayes would lead the charge. The new Houston, a converted generation ship, was already preparing its crew for a ground assault. The Asteroid Queen was outfitting its mining lasers to cut through enemy ships. And all around them, humanity's might was gathering in a show of strength that the galaxy had never seen before. As the clock ticked down, Jake knew this wasn't just about saving the Zelani anymore. This was about ensuring that no one would ever be able to threaten the innocent again. The fleet was moving toward Kepler 442. The Vikoth Imperium had no idea what was coming. Jake's console beeped, and an urgent message popped up. The Vikoth Imperium had begun to deploy reinforcements. The battle was about to escalate beyond anyone's expectations. The fleet was ready. Jake stood in the war room aboard the Relentless, surrounded by the commanding officers of humanity's combined forces. It felt like the calm before the storm. Outside, the stars were cold and distant, but within the confines of this makeshift command center, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Admiral Carter stood at the head of the room, her arms crossed and her face set in stone. She had never been one for speeches, but today, the weight of what they were about to do pressed heavily on her shoulders. "We have a clear objective," she said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "Our job is simple: save the Zelani people and eliminate the Vikoth threat. There will be no surrender, no negotiations. The moment we jump into the system, it's all-out war." Captain Ryan Hayes of the Relentless stood to her right, his eyes hard and focused. "We've got the firepower, Admiral. The Vikoth may have the numbers, but we have something they don't. They're fighting for conquest. We're fighting for survival." Jake glanced at the tactical display in front of him, his eyes tracing the course of the human fleet as it closed in on the Kepler 442 system. His stomach churned at the thought of what awaited them on the surface of the Zelani homeworld. The planet was already burning, its once beautiful crystal cities reduced to smoldering ruins. The Vikoth had been methodical, ruthless in their conquest, but humanity wasn't like the rest of the galaxy. They didn't follow the rules. They didn't care about being civilized. The Relentless would be the first to break through the Vikoth blockade. As the flagship, it was equipped with humanity's most advanced weapons and technology. But it wasn't just the ship that made it formidable, it was the crew. They were the kind of people who didn't hesitate when the innocent were threatened. "This is our moment," Admiral Carter continued, her eyes sweeping across the room. "We will hit them hard, we will hit them fast, and we will make sure they understand that Earth's wrath has no boundaries." Jake's mind raced. The Vikoth thought they had seen the worst of war. They thought they could conquer the peaceful Zelani, wipe them out, and move on to the next system. What they didn't realize was that humanity had been preparing for this moment for years. They studied their enemies, learned their weaknesses, and now they were ready to strike. "Time to make them regret their decision," Jake muttered under his breath. Admiral Carter's sharp gaze met his. "Ready yourself, Morrison. This will be unlike anything you've ever seen." The countdown to jump began. The bridge of the Relentless hummed with the anticipation of every soul aboard. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, checking systems, calibrating weapons, and preparing for battle. Jake sat at his station, watching the seconds tick by. The ships of the human fleet, each with its own purpose, would drop out of hyperspace at once. Every ship was equipped with the latest weaponry: plasma cannons, mass drivers, antimatter warheads, tools designed for one thing: annihilation. The communication channels lit up with status reports from the other ships in the fleet. "Asteroid Queen reports ready to deploy mass drivers," Captain Turner's voice crackled over the comms. "We'll make sure their bioships don't get far." "Stormhawks are prepped for boarding operations," Colonel Santos added, her voice cold and calculated. "We're ready to get up close and personal." Jake nodded to himself. The Vikoth would not know what hit them. With a deep breath, he glanced at Admiral Carter. She gave him a sharp nod. "Jump in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The stars outside the Relentless bridge blurred into lines, and the ship's sensors went dark as they dropped out of hyperspace. The system was immediately filled with a barrage of signals and energy readings. They had arrived. 100 ships, battleships, mercenary fleets, converted cargo haulers, all moving toward Kepler 442. It was an unstoppable force, humanity's wrath personified. The Zelani's homeworld was just ahead. From space, the destruction was visible. The Vikoth ships, massive biomechanical constructs that looked like insect carcasses merged with metal, hovered above the planet like vultures circling their prey. The human fleet didn't hesitate. "All ships weapons free," Admiral Carter commanded, her voice unwavering. "Engage the enemy." The Relentless fired first. Plasma cannons lit up the dark void, a stream of pure energy cutting through the blackness like a knife through flesh. The first Vikoth destroyer was hit squarely in the side, its organic hull sizzling as the plasma tore through it, exposing the metal core beneath. The ship exploded into a fireball, debris scattering into space like shattered glass. The rest of the fleet followed suit. Mining lasers from the asteroid queen sliced through enemy ships with deadly accuracy, sending massive chunks of alien vessels flying into the void. Even the smaller mercenary ships, equipped with modified weapons, got in on the action, firing on the Vikoth like angry hornets. On the Relentless, the crew worked in perfect unison. Weapons systems fired in rapid succession, targeting key points on the Vikoth ships. Shields flickered under the intense barrage of return fire from the alien fleet, but they held strong. The human ships had been designed for this very kind of engagement. "Keep up the pressure," Hayes ordered from the tactical station. "We need to punch a hole through their formation." Jake's heart raced as he watched the battle unfold before him. The Vikoth were resilient, but they were outmatched. The human fleet was ruthless, using every tactic, every weapon in their arsenal to break through the alien defenses. But just as the Vikoth began to falter, a new transmission crackled through the comms. "This is the Vikoth Queen," a cold, metallic voice declared, cutting through the chaos of battle. "You are making a mistake, Earthlings. We do not fear you. We will crush your insignificant fleets. Surrender now and we will spare your lives." Carter's lips curled into a smile, cold and savage. She activated the fleet-wide comms. "Vikoth Queen, you picked the wrong fight," she said, her voice echoing across every ship. "You thought you could wipe out the Zelani with no consequences. Now you'll learn that when you threaten the innocent, humanity answers with fury." Jake couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. It was a simple truth. Humanity didn't wait for permission to do what was right. They didn't wait for orders. They just acted. And today, the galaxy would learn what happened when they crossed the line. A massive Vikoth flagship, even larger than the others, suddenly appeared from behind the planet's moon. Its weapons systems powered up, and it unleashed a deadly barrage aimed directly at the Relentless. Humanity's fleet was not ready for this. The Relentless shuddered as the first salvo from the massive Vikoth flagship tore into its shields. The entire ship groaned under the impact, alarms blaring throughout the bridge. "Shields holding at 60%, the tactical officer called out, his voice strained as the ship bucked under the attack. "We're taking heavy fire from their flagship." Jake gritted his teeth, his hands gripping the edge of his console as the ship rocked. They hadn't expected the Vikoth to have this kind of firepower. It was a beast of a ship, much larger and more heavily armed than anything humanity had seen before. It wasn't just a ship, it was a statement. The Vikoth were making it clear they weren't going down without a fight. "Get us closer to that flagship, Lieutenant," Captain Hayes barked. "We need to disable their weapons systems now." "Aye, Captain," the helm officer responded, her hands moving rapidly over the controls. The Relentless veered sharply, the massive guns of the Vikoth flagship tracking their movements. Jake watched in horror as one of the Relentless outer hulls was hit again, sending debris scattering into space. The ship's systems flickered, and a brief power outage caused the lights to dim before they flickered back on. "Plasma cannons at 50% power," the weapons officer reported, voice tight. "We can't keep this up much longer without reinforcements." Jake's mind raced. They were in the middle of a deadly firefight with no guarantee of survival. The rest of the fleet was engaging the other Vikoth ships, but the flagship, this monstrous, sentient ship, was the real threat. If they didn't take it down soon, the battle would turn against them. "Commander Morrison," Admiral Carter's voice came through the comms, steady despite the chaos. "We need to finish this now. I'm giving the order to initiate Operation Bloodsong." Jake's heart skipped a beat. Bloodsong, it was a plan developed in secret, something only the highest military officials knew about. It was humanity's ace in the hole, a last-resort strategy meant to deal with an enemy that was too powerful to defeat by conventional means. "Are we really doing this, Admiral?" Jake asked, his voice steady but filled with a sense of dread. He knew what Bloodsong meant. It meant a level of destruction that humanity had never used before, at least not on this scale. "We're doing it, Morrison. Prepare the fleet." The order was given. Suddenly, the entire human fleet shifted positions, all of them moving in coordinated, precise movements. The Vikoth flagship fired another devastating barrage at the Relentless, but it missed as the human fleet dispersed, using the chaos of the battle to their advantage. The Asteroid Queen fired its massive mining lasers again, punching holes into the Vikoth's smaller vessels, while the Stormhawks dove into the heart of the enemy formation, firing missiles and engaging in close-range dogfights. Every ship, civilian and military alike, was in sync, working together as though they had trained for this moment their entire lives. The Vikoth flagship's weapons powered up once more, this time targeting the Relentless. But just as the deadly blast was about to hit, the flagship's energy systems began to flicker. The massive ship shuddered. "What the hell?" Jake muttered. He looked over at the tactical officer who was watching the data streams with wide eyes. They're overheating their weapon systems, they're overloading." A massive explosion of energy erupted from the Vikoth flagship, its weapons core destabilizing. For a brief moment, the ship was bathed in an eerie green light as the core failed, its massive energy cannons firing wildly into space, hitting nothing but empty void. But the damage was already done. The Relentless shook violently as the shockwave hit them, causing a cascade of alarms and flashing red lights. The ship's shields flickered again, barely holding. "Captain, we've lost power to the forward weapon systems," the weapons officer shouted. "We're going to have to rely on the backup batteries to fire the plasma cannons." Captain Hayes slammed his fist on the armrest. "Damn it, we can't let them regroup. Prepare all remaining fighters. I want every last gun we have on that flagship." Jake watched the battle unfold, his heart pounding as the Relentless pulled closer to the doomed Vikoth flagship. The human ships had taken heavy casualties, but they were relentless, fighting with everything they had. This wasn't just about the Zelani anymore. It was about sending a message to the entire galaxy. And the Vikoth had made the mistake of thinking they could get away with genocide. Admiral Carter's voice crackled through the comms once again. "Morrison, this is it. We're going to finish this now. All ships target the Vikoth flagship. We're going to push them to their breaking point." Jake nodded, the familiar fire of resolve filling his chest. The Relentless was barely holding together, but humanity wasn't backing down. He looked out the viewport and saw the massive Vikoth ship before them, its once imposing form now severely damaged, struggling to stay intact. "Everyone target their power cores," Jake ordered. "Let's end this." The human fleet concentrated their fire on the Vikoth flagship, the remaining ships closing in for the kill. The plasma cannons of the Relentless roared to life, the last of its power sending an enormous blast into the heart of the flagship's core. The energy from the shot cracked through the Vikoth's shields, and with a final, deafening explosion, the flagship erupted into a massive fireball, breaking apart in the cold depths of space. The battle didn't end immediately. A few remaining Vikoth ships tried to flee, but they were swiftly hunted down by the Stormhawks and the rest of the human fleet. It was a slaughter, pure and simple. There would be no survivors from the Vikoth Imperium today. But Jake didn't feel the usual rush of victory. There was no cheer, no celebration. All he could think about was the cost, the devastation left in the wake of their destruction. He glanced at the broken remains of the Relentless's exterior, knowing that the ship and its crew had paid a heavy price for the Zelani's survival. Humanity had sent its message loud and clear. The Vikoth were no longer a threat. But the war was far from over. As the last of the Vikoth ships are destroyed, a new, unexpected signal cuts through the comms, a distress call from the Zelani survivors on the surface. But this time, it's different. The Vikoth weren't the only threat. The battle was over. At least that's what Jake thought as he stood on the command bridge of the Relentless, watching the debris of the destroyed Vikoth fleet scatter into the void. The stars seemed to shine a little brighter now, the remnants of war fatting into the cold blackness of space. But despite the victory, a gnawing feeling of unease lingered in his gut. He wasn't the only one who felt it. Admiral Carter stood near the viewport, arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the remnants of the Vikoth flagship, which had been reduced to a pile of molten wreckage. She looked like she had seen the end of a war, but in her eyes there was something else, something darker. The human fleet had won, but at what cost? "Damage report," Carter said, her voice calm but sharp. "Structural damage to the Relentless is severe," the tactical officer replied, his fingers flying across the console. "We're at 40% hull integrity. Most of the other ships have taken similar hits, but nothing catastrophic." Jake didn't say anything, his mind racing. The cost of this battle wasn't just physical. He could see it in the eyes of the crew, in the silence that now filled the bridge. Victory felt hollow, and the Zelani survivors were still out there, waiting. Before he could process the thought further, the comms officer's voice crackled through the bridge. "Commander Morrison, Admiral Carter, we've received a new transmission. It's from the Zelani survivors. They're calling for immediate assistance, but there's something wrong with the signal. It's different from before." Jake turned quickly to Carter, who met his gaze with an unreadable expression. "Patch it through," Carter said, her voice steady, though Jake could hear the tension in it. The transmission came through, weak at first, then slowly clearing. It was the same voice from before, crystal singer melody. But this time it wasn't just fear in her voice, it was desperation. "Earth forces, we are grateful," the voice crackled, but it didn't sound like melody anymore. "But there is no time. The Vikoth were not the only threat. The crystal towers are now silent. The song is gone, the children, the singers, all gone." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He glanced at Carter, who was already at the console, her face tight with concern. "Melody, what's happening?" Carter asked, urgency creeping into her voice. The transmission was punctuated by a series of agonized wails, followed by another message. "They have come from the deep. They are the Devourers." Carter's eyes widened as the name hit her like a freight train. Jake felt his blood run cold. The Devourers. He had heard whispers of them, dark legends spoken of in hushed tones. A race of creatures so monstrous and incomprehensible that even the most seasoned soldiers shuddered at the thought. "What do you mean, they have come from the deep?" Carter demanded, her voice cutting through the panic in Melody's voice. "The ground, the caves, they are alive. They are devouring the crystal. The song has stopped. The crystal is turning against us." Melody's voice was nearly drowned out by the eerie wail of some unearthly thing in the background. Jake's mind raced. The Zelani had never been a violent species. They had lived in harmony with their world, their civilization built around the resonance of their crystal songs. Now, the very foundation of their existence was under threat. "They're underground," Melody said, her voice trembling. "The caves, the ancient ones, they've awoken, they are beyond our comprehension, they want the crystal. They will take everything. The children are hiding, but they are no match for them. Please, we need help." The transmission sputtered and went silent. Jake's hands clenched into fists. The Vikoth were defeated, but something far worse had emerged from the depths of the planet. A new enemy, an enemy that could very well turn the tide against them all. "Admiral," Jake said slowly, his voice grim, "the Zelani weren't the only ones the Vikoth were trying to wipe out." Carter's jaw tightened, her eyes darkening with realization. The Devourers were the true threat all along. "Then what are we supposed to do?" Jake asked, his frustration boiling over. "We can't fight something we can't even understand." Carter's eyes hardened. "We fight, the same way we always have. We protect the innocent even when the odds are stacked against us." A sense of unease settled in the pit of Jake's stomach, but he knew Carter was right. The human fleet had come this far, not just to fight the Vikoth, but to ensure that no more innocents would be lost. "Get me a full report on the Devourers," Carter ordered, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "And get those Zelani survivors located. We'll figure out what the hell's going on with these things, and then we'll end it." Jake nodded, his fingers already flying over the console, pulling up every scrap of intelligence on the Devourers he could find. But there was nothing, not really. The Devourers were an ancient race, long thought to be extinct or nothing more than a myth. Now, their very name was a chilling reminder of just how little humanity truly knew about the dark corners of the galaxy. The comms officer cleared his throat nervously. Commander, we've got more incoming signals, a transmission from the Zelani planet. They've opened a gateway to the surface. It's... The officer stopped as another voice, heavy with fear, crackled through the comms. "They're here," the voice whispered. "They're crawling out of the ground." Jake's heart froze. He turned to Carter, who stood motionless, staring at the screen. The message from the surface was cut short by an earth-shaking roar that rattled the comms system. A noise unlike anything Jake had ever heard, a low, guttural, bone-chilling growl that seemed to come from deep within the planet's core. Then silence. Carter stood there for a moment as though weighing her options. The battle had been brutal, but this was something else. Humanity wasn't fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for the very soul of the Zelani people and for the future of the galaxy. She straightened, her eyes sharp with purpose. "Prepare the fleet. We're going to make sure these devourers never see the light of day." The fleet begins preparing for a descent to the surface, but as they approach, something massive shifts beneath the planet. A shadow rises from the depths, something not just monstrous but ancient, stirring to life in response to their presence. The human fleet hovered just outside the atmosphere of the Zelani homeworld, poised for action. The final remnants of the Vikoth fleet had been wiped out, and now the real battle was about to begin. They weren't just facing an enemy fleet anymore. They were facing something far more terrifying, an ancient force buried deep beneath the planet's surface, hidden for eons. Admiral Carter paced the command room of the Relentless, her expression taut, her eyes fixed on the data coming in from the surface. The entire fleet had gathered for the descent. Mercenary ships, military vessels, and converted civilian haulers, all prepped for the most dangerous mission of their careers. "Commander Morrison," Carter said, her voice clipped, "we need a plan for the surface. The Zelani survivors are still hiding in the caves, but these devourers, they're not like anything we've faced before. They're not just alien creatures, they're ancient, predatory, and they know this world better than we do." Jake nodded grimly. He had been studying everything they knew about the Devourers, but the truth was, there wasn't much to go on. The few ancient texts they had managed to decipher described them as beings of immense power, monstrous, shape-shifting creatures that existed in the deep caverns of planets, feeding on the life force of the worlds they inhabited. The Zelani had unknowingly awakened them when they disturbed their hidden sanctuaries. "The first wave of ground teams is ready to deploy, Admiral," Jake said, turning to her. "But we don't know what kind of defenses the Devourers have. We're not even sure how many there are. All we know is that they're underground, and whatever they are, they're big." Carter's eyes flicked to the screen in front of her, where the surface map of Kepler 442 was displayed. There were several marked areas where the transmissions had come from, zones with the highest concentration of Devourer activity. The battle for the surface wouldn't be fought in the open. It would be a battle in the dark. "We've got our work cut out for us," Carter muttered, more to herself than anyone else. "But we can't waste time. We need to find the survivors and shut down whatever it is that's causing the crystal to turn against the Zelani. We need to stop these creatures before they tear the planet apart." She turned to the tactical officer. "Prepare the fleet for atmospheric entry. We drop in 2 hours." As the clock ticked down, Jake felt his nerves coil tighter. The ship was battered from the earlier battle, but they had to press on. He made his way to the hangar bay where the Marines were gearing up for the drop. There was no time to waste. The Zelani were depending on them, and humanity's future was tied to their survival. Inside the hangar, the Marines were moving with disciplined efficiency, checking weapons and armor, loading into their drop pods. Colonel Maria Santos was standing in the corner, her eyes scanning the troops, making sure every detail was perfect. "We don't know what we're up against down there, but we do know one thing," Santos said, her voice firm. "These things, whatever they are, have been feeding on the Zelani for a long time. Now it's our turn to feed." Jake approached her, giving her a quick nod. "You've trained for this. Whatever's down there, we'll face it together." Santos didn't respond immediately. Her eyes were focused on the faces of the soldiers around her, young, old, veterans, and rookies alike. There was a quiet understanding in the air. No one knew what would happen once they hit the surface, but everyone was prepared to do whatever it took. "Everyone's ready, Morrison," she said, her tone softer now. "Let's end this." Jake watched the soldiers file into the drop pods, each one locking in their gear and securing their weapons. He felt a cold rush of adrenaline in his veins. The real war wasn't in space. It was on the ground. The fleet descended toward Kepler 442's surface. The hangar bay doors of the Relentless opened, and the drop pods were launched, each pod carrying a squad of Marines. They shot toward the planet's surface at incredible speed, surrounded by a blinding firestorm of atmosphere friction. Jake sat strapped in his seat, watching the countdown timer tick away. The surface map appeared on his console, showing the various zones where they would land. The Devourers were moving beneath the ground, but the coordinates showed them closing in on the areas where the Zelani survivors had been last located. The tension in the pod was unbearable. Each soldier in their pod was quiet, preparing for the unknown. Some were breathing shallow, others were silently checking their gear. The thrum of the atmospheric entry engines reverberated through their bodies as they plummeted toward the surface. The moment of impact was violent. The pod slammed into the surface with explosive force, the impact sending tremors through Jake's entire body. But it didn't matter. They were on the ground now. The pod doors hissed open with a blast of compressed air, and Jake was the first to exit. The humid air of the planet hit him immediately, the scent of wet earth and something darker, something ancient clinging to the atmosphere. He drew his weapon, stepping out into the alien landscape. The terrain was unlike anything he had ever seen. Massive, jagged crystal formations jutted out from the ground, glowing faintly in the dim light of the planet's twin moons. Everything around them seemed to pulse with energy, as if the planet itself was alive. But it wasn't the beauty that caught Jake's attention. It was the unsettling stillness. "Stay sharp," he whispered into his comms. "These things are listening. We move out in squads." Santos's voice crackled through his earpiece. "We've got movement, Commander. Something's underground. I can feel it." Jake didn't need to hear more. He gestured for his squad to move forward, the Marines spreading out into the eerie landscape. They were searching for the survivors, but Jake had a sinking feeling in his gut. They were being watched. The ground beneath their feet began to vibrate. Jake's eyes snapped toward the horizon, where the ground began to ripple in waves, like something massive was moving just below. A sound, deep and guttural, began to reverberate through the air. It wasn't just the planet, it was something else, something much darker. A massive shape broke through the ground. It rose from the depths like a nightmare made real, its twisted form alien and horrifying, biomechanical, with tendrils and organic matter interwoven with its armor. It was like something from the deepest pits of hell. "Get down," Jake shouted, but it was too late. The Devourer's maw opened, and with it, a shriek so deafening that it shook the very bones of the Marines. The battle for the surface had begun. The Devourer's massive form lunged toward the Marines, its gaping maw threatening to swallow them whole. But then, from the shadows, another figure appeared, a Zelani survivor holding something glowing, pulsing with energy. The world around Jake seemed to slow as the massive Devourer lunged toward them, its mouth gaping open wide enough to swallow entire battalions whole. Its grotesque, biomechanical form shimmered with an eerie green light, tendrils reaching out like the arms of a monstrous spider, each step it took shaking the ground beneath them. "Fall back," Jake shouted, his voice hoarse with urgency, but it was too late. The creature was too fast, its massive claws scraping against the ground as it advanced on the Marines. The soldiers scattered, diving for cover behind jagged crystal structures. A couple of Marines fired on instinct, their weapons sending a hail of rounds into the creature's body, but they bounced off its thick, organic armor. It wasn't enough. The Devourer continued to advance, its massive head swinging toward them, its eyes glowing a sickly yellow. "Get those heavy weapons online," Santos ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to slow it down." Jake crouched behind a crystal spire, his breath coming fast as he watched the creature, his mind working a mile a minute. The Devourer was too strong, too fast, and no weapon they had was going to do more than scratch its surface. They needed something bigger. "Colonel, we need to find the survivors fast," Jake shouted into his comm. "We can't hold off this thing forever." The ground trembled again. The Devourer's jaws snapped shut with a deafening crack, and it moved in closer, its hunger unmistakable. The roar of its hunger reverberated through the air, and in that moment, Jake knew this wasn't just a creature. It was a force of nature, a thing built to consume. And it was coming for them. Then, just as Jake thought they were about to be overwhelmed, a strange, soft glow broke through the darkness. A figure appeared in the distance. It was a Zelani, small in stature compared to the towering beast, but holding something that glowed with a vibrant, pulsing light. The figure raised the object high, and for the first time since their landing, the air around them seemed to hum with an otherworldly energy. "Get back!" Jake shouted to his squad, motioning them to retreat further behind the cover of the crystal formations. They had to give the Zelani time to act. The glowing object in the Zelani's hands shone brighter, illuminating the surrounding area with an eerie light. It was a crystal, unlike any the Zelani had ever used. A dark red core pulsed at its center, and the air around it crackled with a strange energy. The Devourer paused, its head jerking up as it seemed to sense the power emanating from the Zelani's artifact. It hesitated, then roared in fury, stomping its massive claws against the ground in a desperate attempt to reach the figure. "Don't let it get close," Jake shouted, raising his rifle and aiming at the Devourer's exposed side. The Zelani, however, was unmoved by the beast's rampage. Instead, it raised the crystal higher, and with a sudden, deafening shriek, the ground around them began to shake violently. The Devourer let out a horrific howl, its body convulsing as if it were being torn apart from the inside. The ground beneath them cracked open, and massive tendrils of energy shot up from the earth, wrapping themselves around the Devourer's limbs. The creature thrashed in agony, but it was trapped. It was no longer in control. The glow from the Zelani's crystal reached its peak, and with a final, violent roar, the Devourer collapsed. The energy from the crystal seemed to drain the life force from the creature, and with one final burst of light, the Devourer was no more. It crumbled into dust, leaving only a pile of smoking wreckage behind. The battlefield fell silent, the roar of the Devourer replaced by the haunting hum of the glowing crystal. Jake stared at the Zelani, his mind racing. This wasn't just a crystal, it was a weapon powerful enough to bring down a creature like that. The Zelani lowered the crystal slowly, its glow dimming. Their face, pale and exhausted, looked at Jake with a mixture of gratitude and fear. "Thank you," the Zelani whispered, their voice weak but clear. "You have saved us." Jake approached cautiously, his mind still reeling. "What is that thing?" he asked, his voice filled with awe and confusion. "How did you do that?" The Zelani took a deep breath before answering. "This crystal. It was a gift from our ancestors. It was said to be a key, a weapon against the Ancient Ones, but we had forgotten its power, until now." Jake's mind spun as the implications of what they had just witnessed began to sink in. This was no ordinary crystal. It was a relic of unimaginable power, one that had been hidden away by the Zelani's ancestors, waiting for a moment like this. And now it had saved them. But how many more Devourers were out there? And what else was hidden beneath the surface of Kepler 442? "We need to find the others," Jake said, shaking himself out of his daze. "There may be more of these creatures, and we don't know how many are left." The Zelani nodded, their eyes filled with dread. "We do not know how many, but they are many. And they are not all like this one, some are worse." Jake turned to his Marines, signaling for them to move. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. They had won this round, but there were still survivors to find, and they had no idea what other horrors awaited them beneath the surface. With the Devourer's defeat, the way was now clear to push deeper into the planet's core. They would find the Zelani's remaining survivors, and they would stop whatever it was that had awoken the Devourers. But they weren't alone. The Zelani had hidden their secrets well, and now they would uncover the true depth of the planet's dark history. As Jake and his team move deeper into the cave system, a sudden tremor shakes the ground. In the distance, something massive stirs, bigger than anything they've seen before, its shape indistinct in the shadows. The true horror of the planet's past is about to reveal itself.